Far beyond the reaches of Earth's solar system, the gentle Zathian people lived a peaceful existence on their verdant homeworld. The Zathians were a young species, having only recently achieved interstellar flight. Their technology was advanced enough to provide a comfortable life, but they had not yet developed powerful weapons like those possessed by other spacefaring races. This made the Zathians vulnerable, a fact that became all too clear when the Vorik raiding fleet descended upon their system. The Vorik were notorious across the galaxy, a species of marauders who sustained themselves by pillaging weaker worlds. Their ships were fast and heavily armed, each one a bristling fortress of destruction. As the Vorik warships streaked towards the Zathian homeworld, planetary defense systems flared to life, sending bolts of energy streaking into the void. But the Zathians had never invested heavily in weapons research, and their defenses were woefully inadequate against the onslaught. Vorik fighters danced nimbly through the lines of fire, strafing defense installations with brutal efficiency. In the grand chambers of the Zathian High Council, a sense of despair permeated the air. The councilors watched in horror as their planetary shields flickered and died under the relentless assault. They had always known that this day might come, but they had hoped that their policy of non-aggression and diplomacy would protect them. Now, faced with annihilation, they realized the folly of their idealism. As the council watched, a single Vorik warship broke through the faltering defenses and descended into the atmosphere. It came to rest above the capital city, its weapons trained on the gleaming spires below. A message blared across all frequencies, the guttural tones of the Vorik commander dripping with malice. "Zathians," the voice growled, "your pathetic defenses have fallen. We claim this world in the name of the Vorik Dominion. Surrender unconditionally, and we may spare some of your lives to serve as slaves. Resist, and we will reduce your cities to ashes." In that moment, the Zathians knew despair like they had never known before. Their choices were subjugation or destruction, but even as they contemplated this grim reality, a glimmer of hope emerged. "High Counselors," a young Zathian technician said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement, "we're receiving a signal from the edge of our system. It's faint, but it's not Vorik." The counselors turned to the technician, hardly daring to hope. "Who is it?" the High Counselor asked. "Who has come to our aid?" The technician worked frantically at her console, trying to clear up the signal. Then her eyes widened. It's the humans," she said in a whisper. "The humans have heard our distress call." A murmur ran through the council chamber. The humans were a mystery, a species that had only recently made contact with the wider galactic community. They were said to come from a desolate, war-torn planet, a place where life had been forged in the crucible of constant conflict. Many of the older races dismissed them as primitive upstarts, but there were whispers of their prowess in battle, of the fearsome resolve that drove them. For the Zathians, the humans represented a chance, however slim, of survival. They knew that the alternative was too horrific to contemplate. The High Counselor straightened her shoulders, a look of determination settling over her features. "Hail the humans," she said, her voice steady. "Tell them of our plight. Beg for their aid, for without it, the Zathian people will surely perish." As the message was sent, the Zathians huddled in their great cities, listening to the sounds of Vorik ships descending into their atmosphere, and prayed that the humans would prove to be their salvation. The fate of an entire species now hung in the balance, dependent on the mercy of a race they barely knew. In the cold void of space, a human exploration vessel picked up the distress signal. The ship's captain, a stout-hearted woman named Amara Singh, listened to the plea with a growing sense of anger and resolve. She had heard of the Vorik and their predations, and her sense of justice rankled at the thought of another species falling victim to their cruelty. "Set a course for the Zathian system," she ordered, her voice ringing through the ship's intercom, "and send a message to Earth. Tell them we have a species to save." As the exploration vessel pointed its prow towards Zathian space, the first seeds of hope began to sprout in the hearts of the Zathian people. They did not know what form their salvation would take, but they clung to the belief that the universe, in its infinite mystery, had sent them a chance at survival. The humans were coming, and with them, the promise of a future free from the shadow of annihilation. The bridge of the UES Endeavor was a hive of activity as Captain Amara Singh strode to her command chair. The Zathian distress call had sent ripples throughout the ship, and every crew member was now focused on the task at hand, navigating through uncharted space to reach the beleaguered aliens. Amara settled into her chair, her dark eyes scanning the readouts that flowed across her console. The Endeavor was a long way from home, at the very fringes of Earth's sphere of influence. They had been on a mission of exploration, charting new star systems and seeking out signs of life. Never had they expected to be called into a fight. But Amara knew that they couldn't ignore the Zathian plea. The Endeavor was a science vessel, not a warship, but it was armed, and its crew was well trained. More than that, the principles of the Earth Space Command were clear. All sapient life was precious, and it was the duty of humanity to protect those who could not protect themselves. "Captain, we're picking up more transmissions from the Zathian system," the communications officer reported. "The Vorik have begun ground assaults. The Zathians are fighting back, but they're outmatched." Amara's jaw tightened. The Vorik were even worse than she had imagined. Not content with orbital bombardment, they were determined to crush the Zathians utterly. Every minute counted. "Push our engines to the limit," she ordered. "And get me aligned to Earth Command. We're going to need backup." In the depths of space, the Endeavor's engines flared to life, propelling the ship forward at tremendous speed. In her ready room, Amara argued passionately with her superiors, painting a vivid picture of the Zathian plight and the cruelty of the Vorik. She knew that committing Earth's forces to a fight in a distant corner of the galaxy was no small ask, but she believed with every fiber of her being that it was the right thing to do. To her relief and gratitude, Earth Command agreed. The images of Zathian cities burning, of civilians fleeing in terror from Vorik ground troops, had stirred something in the collective human consciousness. This was a moment that would define humanity's role in the cosmos. Would they stand by while the innocent were slaughtered, or would they step up and defend those in need? The answer came in the form of a massive mobilization. The pride of Earth's fleet, the dreadnought UES Retribution, was dispatched immediately, along with a full complement of battleships, fighters, and troop transports. It was a force that could shift the balance of power in any conflict, a testament to humanity's military might. But it was more than just weapons and ships that were mobilized. The call went out across Earth and her colonies. Volunteers were needed, brave men and women willing to fight for a species they had never met. The response was overwhelming. From the teeming cities of Earth to the rugged outposts on Mars and beyond, people stepped forward, ready to lay down their lives for the Zathian cause. Leading this force was Admiral Jaya Misra, a veteran of countless battles and a legend in the Earth Space Command. She had been on the brink of retirement, looking forward to a quiet life after decades of service. But when the call came, she didn't hesitate. She knew that this was the most important mission she would ever undertake. As the human fleet assembled and set out for Zathian space, Amara and the crew of the Endeavor continued their desperate race against time. They were still days away from the Zathian system, and every transmission they received painted a more dire picture. The Vorik were relentless, and the Zathians were being pushed to the brink. But even as the situation grew more desperate, Amara refused to give in to despair. She knew that help was coming, that the full might of humanity was bearing down on the Vorik, and she knew that her own ship and crew had a role to play. "Prepare for battle," she announced as the Endeavor finally neared the Zathian system. "We may be outgunned, but we're not going to let the Vorik have their way. We'll buy time for the Zathians and for our own reinforcements." As the crew rushed to battle stations, a sense of purpose and resolve settled over the ship. They were no longer just explorers or scientists. They were warriors, defenders of the innocent, champions of life in a cold and unforgiving universe. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, united in their cause and their courage. And in the distance, still far beyond sensor range, the mighty human fleet continued its inexorable advance, a promise of hope and salvation speeding through the silent void of space. As the UES Endeavour dropped out of warp at the edge of the Zathian system, Captain Amara Singh felt a weight settle on her shoulders. The fate of an entire species might well rest on the actions she took in the next few hours. Status report, she barked, her eyes fixed on the view screen, which showed the swirling colors of the system's nebula. Sensors are picking up multiple Vorik ships in orbit around the fourth planet, the tactical officer reported. It looks like they've established a blockade. Amara nodded grimly. The Vorik were no fools. They knew that the only way to completely subjugate the Zathians was to cut them off from any potential aid. What about the Zathians? She asked. Any signs of life on the surface? There was a moment of tense silence as the sensors probed the planet. Then the science officer spoke up, his voice tinged with relief. I'm detecting numerous life signs in the main cities, he said. The Zathians are still holding out. Amara allowed herself a small smile. The Zathians were proving to be more resilient than the Vorik had anticipated, but she knew that time was running out. The Endeavour was just one ship, and the Vorik blockade looked formidable. Hail the Zathian leadership, she ordered. Let's let them know they're not alone anymore. There was a crackle of static as the communications channel opened. Then a face appeared on the screen. A Zathian face, angular and elegant, with large, luminous eyes that seemed to hold an ocean of sorrow. I am Counselor Zoran of the Zathian High Council, the alien said, his voice heavy with emotion. To whom am I speaking? Amara stood, straightening her uniform. I am Captain Amara Singh of the United Earth Ship Endeavour. We received your distress signal and have come to offer whatever aid we can. Zoran's eyes widened, a glimmer of hope flickering in their depths. Captain Singh, you have no idea what it means to us to know that we are not alone. The Vorik, they have been relentless. Our defenses are crumbling, and our people are terrified. Amara's heart clenched at the despair in Zoran's voice. She could only imagine what it must be like to watch one's world teetering on the brink of destruction. Counselor Zoran, I want you to know that the Endeavour is just the first of many. The full might of the Earth Space Command is on its way. We will not let the Vorik destroy your people. Zoran bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with relief. Thank you, Captain Singh. Thank you. The Zathian people will never forget what you have done for us. As the communication ended, Amara turned to her crew. You heard the counselor. The Zathians are counting on us. Let's show the Vorik what happens when they mess with our friends. Over the next few hours, the Endeavour played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Vorik ships. They darted in and out of the nebula, using its swirling gases to mask their movements. They targeted the Vorik's sensors and communication arrays, sowing chaos and confusion among the blockading force. It was a dangerous game. The Endeavour was a science vessel, not a battleship. Every engagement with the Vorik left the ship scared and battered, its shields straining under the onslaught of enemy fire. But Amara and her crew were relentless. They knew that every minute they could distract the Vorik was another minute that the Zathians could hold out, another minute closer to the arrival of reinforcements. And then, just when it seemed that the Endeavour could take no more, a cheer went up from the tactical station. Captain, I'm picking up new contacts at the edge of the system. It's the Retribution and her battle group. Amara sagged in her chair, relief flooding through her. They had done it. They had held the line long enough for help to arrive. As the mighty human fleet swept into the system, the Vorik ships scattered like leaves before a hurricane. The Retribution's massive guns spoke, and Vorik ships shattered under the onslaught. Fighters darted and weaved, picking off enemy craft with surgical precision. And on the bridge of the Endeavour, Amara Singh watched with a fierce pride as her fellow humans brought the full force of their might to bear in defense of an innocent species. This, she knew, was humanity's finest hour. But even as the tide of battle turned, she knew that the fight was far from over. The Vorak were a wily foe, and they would not give up their prize easily. The real test, she suspected, was yet to come. The arrival of the human fleet changed the game in the Zathian system. The once triumphant Vorak now found themselves on the defensive, their ships battered and their confidence shaken. But they were not defeated, not by a long shot. They were a proud and fierce race, and they would not relinquish their prize easily. Admiral Jaya Misra, commanding from the bridge of the Retribution, knew this all too well. She had studied the Vorak, had learned of their brutality and their tenacity. She knew that the initial victory had bought them time, but the real battle was just beginning. In a conference call with Captain Singh and the Zathian leadership, Misra laid out her plan. "We need to establish a defensive perimeter around Zathia Prime," she said, referring to the Zathian homeworld. "The Vorak will regroup and counterattack, and we need to be ready." Counselor Zoran, his holographic image flickering on the screen, nodded in agreement. "Our people will fight alongside you," he said. "We may not have the weapons or the training of your soldiers, but we will defend our home with everything we have." Misra smiled, a fierce pride shining in her eyes. "I have no doubt of that, Counselor. Your people have shown remarkable bravery in the face of terrible odds. It will be an honor to fight alongside you." Over the next few days, the human fleet took up positions around Zathia Prime. The Retribution and her battleships formed the backbone of the defense, their massive guns pointed outward like the spines of some great metallic beast. Smaller ships, frigates, destroyers, and fighters, patrolled the perimeter, watchful for any sign of Vorak activity. On the surface of Zathia Prime, human soldiers worked side by side with Zathian defenders to fortify cities and set up defensive emplacements. It was a strange and wonderful sight, these two species who had never met before, working together with a common purpose. But even as the defenses took shape, a sense of unease hung over the system. The Vorak had vanished, retreating to the edge of the system after their initial defeat, but everyone knew they would be back. The question was not if, but when. The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Just a week after the human fleet's arrival, long-range sensors picked up a massive Vorak armada jumping into the system. It was a force that dwarfed anything the humans had encountered before. Hundreds of ships, from small raiders to massive dreadnoughts, each one bristling with weapons. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Misra watched the sensor readouts with a grim determination. She had hoped for more time, hoped to have the defenses more secure before the Vorak returned. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. She opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Misra. The Vorak have returned in force. They think they can sweep us aside and claim this world for their own. Let's show them how wrong they are." A chorus of acknowledgments came back over the comm. The voices of human and Zathian commanders united in their resolve. Misra turned to her tactical officer. "What's the status of our perimeter?" The officer consulted his screen. "All ships in position, Admiral. The Vorak will have to fight through a wall of fire to reach Zathia Prime." Misra nodded, a fierce smile tugging at her lips. "Good. Then let's give them a proper human welcome." As the Vorak fleet closed in, the human ships opened fire. A storm of missiles, lasers, and railgun rounds tore through space, slamming into the advancing Vorak ships. The enemy returned fire, their own weapons blazing, and the void lit up with the fury of battle. On the surface of Zathia Prime, the ground shook as the titanic forces clashed overhead. In the cities, Zathian civilians huddled in shelters, praying for the safety of their defenders. In the fortified positions outside the cities, human and Zathian soldiers manned their guns, ready to repel any landing attempts. It was a battle unlike any the galaxy had seen before. The Vorak, used to preying on the weak and defenseless, found themselves facing an enemy that was their equal in firepower and their superior in resolve. The human ships fought with a ferocity that stunned the Vorak, their crews driven by a righteous anger at the injustice they had witnessed. But the Vorik were not so easily cowed. They fought back with a savagery born of desperation, throwing ship after ship against the human lines. For every Vorik ship destroyed, it seemed two more took its place, an endless tide of aggression pouring into the system. On the Retribution's bridge, Admiral Misra watched the battle unfold with a growing sense of unease. They were holding the line, but at a terrible cost. Human ships were being lost, brave crews sacrificing themselves to keep the Vorik at bay. And still the enemy came on, relentless and seemingly unstoppable. She knew, with a sinking certainty, that they could not win this battle through attrition alone. The Vorik had the numbers, and they seemed willing to spend them endlessly. If the line broke, if the Vorik made it to the surface of Zathia Prime, she pushed the thought aside. That could not happen, would not happen. But as the battle raged on, and the casualties mounted, she knew that something had to change. They needed a new plan, a way to strike at the heart of the Vorik offensive. And in that moment, as the fate of a world hung in the balance, an idea began to form in Admiral Misra's mind. It was a desperate plan, a risky gamble, but it might just be their only hope. She turned to her communications officer. "Get me Captain Singh on the Endeavor. I have a mission for her." Captain Amara Singh stood on the bridge of the Endeavor, her ship shuddering under the impact of another Vorik salvo. The battle had been raging for hours, and the human fleet was being pushed to its limits. "Shields at 30%, Captain," the tactical officer reported, his voice tense. "We can't take much more of this." Amara gritted her teeth. The Endeavor was a tough ship, but she was never meant for sustained combat like this. They needed a breakthrough, and they needed it soon. As if in answer to her thoughts, the comm crackled to life. "Endeavor, this is Admiral Misra. I have a mission for you." Amara straightened, her heart pounding. "We're ready, Admiral. What do you need?" "We need to disrupt the Vorik command and control," Misra said. "Our intel suggests that they're coordinating their attack from a flagship at the rear of their formation. If we can take that ship out, it might throw their whole offensive into disarray." Amara understood immediately. It was a daring plan, but it was the kind of bold stroke they needed. "We'll get it done, Admiral," she said. "The Endeavor won't let you down." As the communication ended, Amara turned to her crew. "You heard the Admiral. We're going in. Plot a course through the battle, and prepare for a stealth approach." The Endeavor, small and nimble compared to the giant battleships, slipped through the chaos of the battle like a ghost. They wove through the fire, dodging missiles and energy beams, always keeping the Vorik flagship in their sights. As they drew closer, Amara could see their target. It was a monstrous ship, easily twice the size of the Retribution, bristling with weapons emplacements. It hung back from the main battle, surrounded by a screen of smaller ships. "That's our target," Amara said. "Prepare a spread of torpedoes, and get ready to engage those escort ships." The Endeavor struck like a viper, its torpedoes leaping from the launch tubes and racing towards the Vorik flagship. At the same time, the ship's guns opened up, pounding the escort ships with a barrage of fire. For a moment, it looked like the plan would work. The torpedoes slammed into the flagship's shields, causing them to flare and flicker. The escort ships, caught off guard, reeled under the Endeavor's assault. But then, the flagship's guns swiveled, locking onto the Endeavor. A heartbeat later, the human ship was engulfed in a storm of fire. "Shields down," the tactical officer shouted. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Amara held onto her chair as the ship rocked under the onslaught. They had landed a blow, but the Vorik flagship was too powerful. They needed to retreat, to regroup, and... "Captain, I'm picking up a new contact," the sensor officer suddenly cried. It's the Zathians." Amara's head snapped around, her eyes widening in disbelief. There, emerging from the plain of the battle, was a fleet of Zathian ships. They were smaller than the human vessels, their designs unfamiliar, but they moved with a grace and purpose that took Amara's breath away. At the front of the formation was a ship larger than the rest, its hull gleaming with a pearlescent sheen. As Amara watched, a communication from this ship burst across all frequencies. "This is Counselor Zoran of the Zathian Expeditionary Force," the voice said, ringing with a newfound strength. "We come to stand with our human allies, to defend our world and our way of life. To the Vorik, we say this: leave now or face the consequences." As if to punctuate his words, the Zathian ships opened fire. But it was not the standard energy weapons that Amara expected. Instead, the Zathian ships unleashed a barrage of what looked like shimmering, pulsing energy fields. These fields washed over the Vorik ships, and where they touched, the enemy vessels simply stopped. Their engines went dead, their weapons fell silent, as if the very laws of physics had been suspended. "It's some kind of stasis field," the Endeavor's science officer exclaimed. "They're neutralizing the Vorik ships." Amara felt a surge of hope. With the Zathians' help, they might just have a chance. "Hail the Zathian flagship," she ordered. "Let's coordinate our attack." What followed was a ballet of destruction, as human and Zathian ships worked in perfect harmony. The Zathians would immobilize the Vorik vessels, and the humans would move in for the kill. The Vorik flagship, once an impregnable fortress, found itself beset on all sides, its defenses crumbling under the relentless assault. And then, with a final titanic explosion, the flagship broke apart. Its destruction rippled through the Vorik fleet like a shockwave, sowing panic and disarray. On the Retribution's bridge, Admiral Misra watched with a growing sense of triumph as the Vorik offensive faltered and then collapsed. The enemy ships, once so fearsome, were now in full retreat, fleeing before the combined might of the human and Zathian forces. "We've done it," she whispered, scarcely able to believe it. "We've turned the tide." But even as the jubilation spread through the human fleet, Misra knew that this was not the end. The Vorik had been beaten back, but they were not defeated. They would regroup, lick their wounds, and come again. If they were to truly secure the Zathians' future, if they were to ensure that no other species would suffer as they had, then the Vorik threat had to be eliminated at its source. They had to take the fight to the enemy. She turned to her command crew, a new fire burning in her eyes. "Get me a line to Earth Command," she said, "and prepare the fleet for a new offensive. We're going to end this once and for all." In the aftermath of the great battle, an uneasy calm settled over the Zathian system. The Vorik had been repelled, their grand offensive shattered, but everyone knew that it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and returned. On the surface of Zathia Prime, in the great halls of the Zathian High Council, Admiral Misra met with Captain Singh and Counselor Zoran. The mood was somber, the weight of recent events hanging heavy in the air. "We've won a great victory," Zoran said, his voice tired but proud. "But we all know it's not over. The Vorik will be back, and they'll be stronger than ever." Misra nodded, her face set in grim lines. "You're right, Counselor, which is why we can't afford to sit back and wait for them to come to us. We need to take the fight to them." Singh leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "What are you proposing, Admiral?" Misra brought up a holographic display, a star map of the surrounding sectors. "Our intelligence has located what we believe to be a major Vorik staging ground, here in the Cromler system. It's where they repair and rearm their ships, where they plan their raids. If we can strike them there, we might be able to cripple their war effort, maybe even force them to the negotiating table." Zoran studied the map, his brow furrowed. "It's a daring plan, Admiral, but the Cromler system is deep in Vorik space. You'd be vastly outnumbered, cut off from support." Misra smiled, a fierce, predatory expression. "That's where you come in, Counselor. We need the Zathian fleet to hold the line here, to keep the Vorik from retaking your world while we strike at their heart." Zoran was silent for a long moment, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. Finally, he nodded. "The Zathian people owe you a debt we can never repay. If this is what you need from us, then we will give it. Our ships will guard our skies until you return." Sing stood, her posture radiating determination. "And the Endeavor will be with you, Admiral. We started this journey together, and we'll see it through to the end." Misra clasped Sing's hand, a gesture of respect and camaraderie. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Captain." The preparations were made in a flurry of activity. The bulk of the human fleet, led by the Retribution, would make the jump to the Cromler system, leaving a small force to bolster the Zathian defenses. It was a risky move, spreading their forces thin, but it was a risk they had to take. As the fleet prepared to depart, Misra addressed her crews, her words broadcast to every ship, every station. "We stand on the edge of history," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "What we do in the next few hours will determine the fate not just of the Zathians, but of countless other species across the galaxy. We fight not just for ourselves, but for all those who cannot fight for themselves. Remember that, as we go into the fire. Remember what we stand for." A cheer went up from the assembled crews, a roar of defiance and determination that echoed across the void. And then, in a flash of quantum distortion, the fleet vanished, leaping across the light years towards their destiny. They emerged in the Cromler system like a thunderbolt, weapons charged and shields raised. The Vorak, caught off guard, scrambled to respond, their ships pouring out of docks and staging areas to meet the threat. It was a battle unlike any that had come before. The human ships, vastly outnumbered, fought with a skill and ferocity that belied their true strength. They struck at the Vorak ships as they deployed, catching them before they could form up, sowing chaos and confusion in their ranks. At the heart of the battle, the Retribution and the Endeavor fought side by side, a bulwark of defiance against the Vorak tide. Their guns blazed, their shields flared, and all around them, Vorak ships shattered and burned. But the Vorak kept coming, wave after wave, a seemingly endless tide of ships and guns. For every vessel the humans destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, and soon the toll began to mount. On the Retribution's bridge, Misra watched the tactical display with a growing sense of desperation. They were inflicting tremendous damage on the Vorak, but they couldn't sustain these losses for long. They needed something more, something to tip the balance. And then, like a miracle, it came. A new contact on the sensors, emerging from warp at the edge of the system. A fleet of ships, their designs a fusion of human and Zathian technology. At their head, a massive vessel, dwarfing even the Retribution. "This is Counselor Zoran of the Zathian Alliance," a voice crackled over the comms. "We come to stand with our human brothers and sisters to end the Vorak threat once and for all. Admiral Misra, we await your command." Misra felt a surge of emotion, of gratitude and relief and fierce, unyielding pride. "All ships, form up on the Zathian fleet," she commanded, her voice ringing with a new strength. "It's time to finish this." What followed was a rout, a complete and total victory that would echo through the ages. The combined human and Zathian forces, united in purpose and resolve, tore through the Vorak lines like a hot knife through butter. The Vorak ships, once so fearsome, crumpled and shattered under the onslaught, their formation disintegrating into a panicked rout. And at the center of it all, the Retribution and the Endeavor, the tip of the spear, driving deep into the heart of the Vorak war machine. When it was over, when the last Vorak ship had fled or fallen, a cheer went up across the fleet, a cry of triumph that spanned the stars. They had done it. Against all odds, against all expectation, they had broken the Vorak, had shattered their power, and freed the galaxy from their threat. On the bridge of the Retribution, Misra sagged in her chair, exhaustion and elation warring within her. It had been a long road, a hard fight, but they had made it. They had won. She looked out at the stars, at the infinite possibilities that now lay before them, and she smiled. The galaxy had changed today, and she knew, with a certainty that rang in her bones, that it had changed for the better. The Zathians were safe. The Vorak were broken. And humanity had shown what it could do, had shown the power of its compassion, its courage, its unyielding determination to stand for what was right. It was a new dawn, a new era, and Admiral Misra couldn't wait to see what it would bring.